Well, hello. Welcome back. If you didn't already know, this is BAM the Pod. We have another episode of BAM the Pod with Friend. I'm excited to announce that Dan Martinez, who guest starred with us last episode, is here for another exciting episode. We decided while we had Dan around, we would go ahead and do a special episode for you, which we're going to talk about shortly. But in case you accidentally selected this and don't know what you're listening to, this is BAM the Pod. BAM is an acronym. It stands for Bad Action Movie Brothers. My name is Braden Wirtz. I'm here with my brother, Brian.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I wasn't sure for a minute there. There was a little bit of a pause.
Well, I drank a drink already.
We all did, because we're marathoning this one.
I made another one and I drank it already.
Oh, you already drank your new one?
Like while you were talking.
Oh, man. This is going to be fun, because we've had a lot of drinks already. So we had an interesting idea. At the end of our last episode on Lone Wolf McQuade, which was a recommendation by Dan, we weren't really sure what we wanted to do. I had a long list of films that were possibilities, but we thought, well, since we have Dan here, let's kind of marathon this, and let's do another podcast, but let's just pull something, a wild card. Full on Charlie Day.
Full wild turkey.
Yeah, wild turkey. Or Charlie Day, as I like to say, for the Always Sunny fans. We're going to do, scare quotes, top 5. Go ahead, Brian. What do you got? What were you going to say?
Top 5. Yeah, we're going to do like we each picked 5 movies to talk about. We don't know what any of us are going to say, so there could be duplicates for different reasons. I don't know. We talked about doing like our top 5 movies, but then I don't think my men are really top 5. I think I sort of have 5 different movies that I would sort of categorize in different ways that I like for different reasons, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's like, and we talked about that. There's no like set blueprint. I kind of tried to pick my top 5 in terms of 5 great action movies that are campy and cheesy in their own ways, but are classics. Maybe movies we would do independently on this podcast, or maybe ones we wouldn't do just because they're too kind of classic, too sort of obvious. But even that's fine too. And I kind of have always had a list in my head of those movies. So mine are probably going to be a little bit more obvious picks. But I mean, it's a wild card episode. So that's what's going to be fun, is we're each going to kind of talk about 5 movies we love that fall into this sort of bad action movie genre. And in case you're relatively new to the podcast, just as way of clarification, we do like to say that the word bad that we use in our name is not necessarily guaranteeing that we think it's a terrible film. These are oftentimes films that we really enjoy, and sometimes they're actually good films, and that's why we like to remind people that bad can have more than one meaning. You can have your bad like in the way that Shaft is one bad mofo.
Yeah.
Or you could be bad like that's just terrible. And we kind of do the spectrum.
Definitely.
We do the whole spectrum. So, you already said you drank a drink.
Yeah.
That's the other thing we do here at BAM the Pod, is we make drinks because it's more fun that way, and we just enjoy having our adult libations. And so, what did you make over there, Brian?
Well, I felt like I needed kind of like a meal.
Okay.
And so I made a protein shake, a milkshake, but I made a Kahlua milkshake.
Ooh.
And I put some ice cubes and some protein, a chocolate protein powder. And I put some oats, like a quarter of a cup of oats, a scoop of protein powder, probably about 1 to 2 inches of a piece of banana, just to add a little bit of that in there. A scoop of peanut butter.
I like how you said 1 to 2 inches, not just like a quarter banana.
Right. I don't know. I was being very specific in my generalization of how much banana. And some cinnamon.
All right.
Yeah. And a little almond milk for some extra liquid. I was gonna try to do like a 5-ingredient drink, right, for our 5.
That would have been nice,
but I
think
cheated a little bit.
5.
Yeah, I cheated a little because I wanted a little cinnamon for flavor and I needed a little almond milk to add a little bit of extra liquid, along with the Kahlua, a couple ounces of Kahlua.
Well, I like that you were trying to have
Yeah.
5, but you have a little bit more because that may be what happens with my movie selection.
Sure.
I'm gonna try to keep it to 5, but there's inevitably gonna be like other ones I want to mention. So we'll see how the time goes. We'll see how the discussion goes, because I could we all could probably talk for hours endlessly, and pick great films that we love. But did you? Because this is kind of hard since we didn't pick one movie. Did you come up with a name for your drink, or was it just sort of like, hey, it's late, I want a meal, but I want a drink, so I want to make.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to do a 5-ingredient drink, like a top 5, milkshake.
Gotcha.
But I cheated a little with a few extra ingredients. So
I gotcha. Well, I'm here with Dan, like I mentioned at the beginning. Dan's over here on his phone. I think he's googling some getting his list ready. I think he's doing some preparatory work. But Dan made several drinks already for me and for himself. We tried to keep it simple this time. We had gone to the liquor store earlier today because we were preparing for our podcast and got some ingredients. And I picked up a bottle of the Jim Beam Devil's Cut. Have you ever had that?
No, I don't know what that is.
So Jim Beam obviously is a bourbon that's been around forever. Big name. It's very, very cost affordable or cost efficient. It's not an expensive bourbon. I would say, truthfully, it's not a great bourbon. Most of the time, their products are on the lower end, but I would say it's one of the best low-end bourbons out there, and it's a classic. I think it is the best-selling bourbon in the country. But the Devil's Cut specifically is a little bit of a step up from like the white label. Jim Beam does a lot of really interesting things with their bourbons. In the Devil's Cut specifically, they actually like extract bourbon from the barrel. They they age it in the barrel like they would need to do for a bourbon. And then they have some kind of mechanism or something where they basically, I guess, cut into the barrel and actually extract some of the bourbon that's like seeped into the wood, at least as far as I understand, to give it a really pungent, strong taste. I actually like it. What are I know, Dan, it's maybe not your favorite. Tell us about what you think about it.
Well, Devil's Cut, I remember when it first came out, as we said in the last episode, I bartended for a long time, and I got to try out Devil's Cut when it first got brought out to the market. And I just remember it was intense. It's not my go-to. I'm not a Jim Beam kind of guy. Jim Beam's the kind of guy that shows up to the party that you just didn't invite. You know what I mean? You got Jack, you got Johnny, and then all of a sudden Jim Beam shows up, and you're like, this is going to be a shit show. But that's how I feel about Devil's Cut. I'm currently drinking on a little Buffalo Trace action. I've actually got turned on to it by you, Brad.
Yes.
I had never heard of Buffalo Trace before, and this was like a few years ago. He had turned me on to this, and actually, I never told you this, but at my bar, I started ordering Buffalo Trace. That way we could serve it to our customers.
So tell me a little about this Buffalo Trace.
If you've never had Buffalo Trace, it is probably, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree on this, the best bourbon you can buy, especially for the dollar. It's one of the highest reviewed, highest sought after bourbons, to the point now where it's even difficult to find, because it's not expensive. And it's a brewery or I should say a distillery. Sorry, it's late and I've been drinking. A distillery that's been around for a long, long time. But it's just highly reputable. And I believe it's, I'm sorry, it's late at night. What's the Pappy Van Winkle? Is that what it's called?
Pat Van Winkle. Yeah,
the really desirable, like expensive, rare Kentucky bourbon. I believe that Buffalo Trace may be the same distillery that comes from. Now, don't quote me on that. I may be talking as a drunk man who's drinking Jim Beam who wasn't invited to the party. Dan has something to say.
Going back off what you said, even now when I go to ABC or something, the one that near my house, they have to specially order it for me. and they let me know when it actually comes in stock. So he's absolutely right. It's really hard to find sometimes just for the price and stuff.
Interesting. Now I'm gonna have to go on a search for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask your local liquor store, they'll order it for you. It used to be like just a normal bourbon you could find on the shelf. It's unmistakable because it has a picture of a buffalo. It's called Buffalo Trace. If you see the bottle, you'll recognize it. It's been around forever. But I believe, and again, I didn't do a lot of research before this, but I believe they changed their recipe a little bit some years back. But now, to me, it's a masterfully made, delicious bourbon. And you can get a bottle for about $25. They're also the same company that makes Eagle Rare, which is a really excellent bourbon. And there's a low-end bourbon that they make called Old Charter that comes from the same distillery. And it's a really cheap bourbon. You can get like a handle for $20. It's not great, but it's still solid for the price. So that's a great selection. Dan is drinking a much better bourbon. The Jim Beam Devil's Cut, I picked it because it's called Devil's Cut, and I felt like I'm doing my top 5. This is a selection of films of bad action movies, so this is kind of like my Devil's Cut.
Now, I would like to get, while we have Dan here, I'd like to get his opinion on one that you turned me on to, which is the Old Granddad 114.
Have you ever had that, Tam? He said he hasn't had that. I have some in my liquor cabinet. So maybe if he finishes Buffalo Trace and wants another drink, I'll have him pour some. Or maybe I'll have him try it tomorrow or another time because it is 114 proof. So, but it's really good.
I mean, you had me at 114. Now I kind of, you know what? I just want to be complete incoherent when we do our top 5.
Yeah, that's a newer bourbon that Old Granddad came out, and I think that is an excellent bourbon as well. Also for the price, you can only get that in like a normal bottle sized. They don't sell that in handles. You can get a Buffalo Trace handle, the big bottle, but it's very hard to find. Another bourbon that also comes from the Buffalo Trace distillery, I believe. That it's more of a wheated bourbon. Is Weller's, which Dan mentioned. ABC Liquors. ABC Liquors, if you have one of those, they're very popular in Florida. They have a contract where they get this Weller's bourbon, which I'm not even sure if you can get it anywhere outside of ABC Liquors, but it's very, very good. So if you're looking for a good bourbon, Buffalo Trace is excellent. If you're looking for a cheap bourbon that's got a pungent, powerful, kind of acquired taste, Devil's Cut. Yeah, but I think Dan's assessment was correct. Jim's never invited to the party, but sometimes you just got to pull him out anyway.
Okay.
Sometimes you got to pull that Jim out anyway, whether he's invited or not.
That just sounds really dirty. Just pulling Jim out.
Oh boy. Okay, so
yeah,
I'm excited about this because this is an unpredictable.
No,
we don't know where this is going to go. So let's have. So I guess since I suggested this idea, if you don't mind, I will start. I was thinking we would start with our quote-unquote 5th selection and then kind of do like a typical move down to number 1 because that kind of makes sense. Save the best for last. Maybe people will actually listen till the end. Now, and I'm sure you guys are with me on this. I mean, anytime you're selecting favorites, it's sometimes the difference is negligible. You know, it's like kind of mood based. Like what, it's hard to say, but I just tried to pick 5 action movies that I just absolutely love, and that are great, but also maybe a little bit ridiculous.
Perfect.
So let's start with number 5 of my top 5 bad action movies of all time. My selection is Showdown in Little Tokyo.
Now, we've actually mentioned like maybe doing this on the podcast, and we haven't yet. So some of these we still may.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to go overly deep into the actual plot of the movie.
Maybe you can just tell us a snippet about it and what you like about it. How about that?
Yeah. I actually discovered this movie late in the game. I didn't, so in a sense, I didn't watch it in the 80s like when I was growing up. I don't remember. You know what? Actually, honestly, I think I got it in like a double pack. So some people who are old enough to remember actually like going to the electronic store and buying DVDs will remember the double pack, which is where you like buy one movie and you get like another movie with it, and it's like they call it like a double feature. They kind of market it like
Sure.
like the old drive-in movies. And I think I got it with another movie. It's probably a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie because I'm a big JCVD fan, and I think it came with another movie. I'm like, all right, this looks cool. And I watched it, and I think I liked it better than the movie it even came with. Obviously, I did, because I don't remember what the movie was, but I'm putting this as my number 5. But it stars Dolph Lundgren. And this is one of the few movies of this era where he is the lead. He's not playing Drago to Stallone, or, he made a lot of cameos in different films, an important person in the 80s as an action star. But this one, he was the lead. He does a lot of, actually, martial arts in it, which is really interesting. Because as we've talked about, he did have a martial arts background. He had a fighting background. So he wasn't playing just kind of like a dopey oaf, big doofus guy. He was like very kind of playing more of an intelligent, sort of sophisticated, kind of streetwise cop. Although he's still Dolph Lundgren, so let's not be unreasonable. But what was really cool about this is that it also had Brandon Lee. And I've always been a huge Bruce Lee fan. We've mentioned Bruce Lee almost every podcast. I feel like he gets mentioned. But it was cool to see his son Brandon Lee in a role. This was obviously pre-Crow, which is what I knew him from, and which most people knew him from, which was, of course, the film that he had the mysterious, death and all the controversy surrounding that whole issue. But it was interesting to see him in this sort of buddy-buddy, sort of cop crime kung fu movie. It had a little bit more levity to it, a little bit more humor, certainly more so than like The Crow. And I thought he was really good in it too. I think I read once Leonard Maltin saying how kind of he felt like Brandon Lee sort of stole the show. And I think that there's some truth to that, although I still love Dolph Lundgren. I know you're a big Lundgren fan. But it also had my sort of late 80s, early 90s movie crush, which is Tia Carrere.
From Wayne's World.
I always had, yes, I just thought I still think she's a beautiful, just incredible, gorgeous woman. I always had a bit of a I don't know, teenage boner for her, I guess we'll say. And she stars in this, and actually, not to get weird, but she is at least mostly naked in some scenes.
I'm pretty sure I experienced puberty the first time I saw her.
So I just love this movie. It's fun. It's action packed. It's goofy in a lot of ways. But I still pull it out and watch it. And it's got Tia Carrere and she's mostly naked in some scenes. And Dolph Lundgren and Brandon Lee.
Not
What more
much.
do you need to know?
But apparently, maybe a few more
So
things
that's
because
my
it didn't make
number
number
5.
1. Yeah.
That's true. Valid point. All right, so let's pass the mic around. Brian, you want to go next? Or you want to do Dan?
Well, Dan's our guest. I'll let him choose. Would you like to go next, or would you like? Okay, let's go.
He says he's ready, so I'm going to pass the mic.
All right, so I'm actually glad that we decided to go from 5 to number 1, because when I was thinking about my list, I was trying to think, God, what could I think of that's not too mainstream, but also what I grew up on. Now, this 5th one.
Ooh, yes.
With Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery.
That's a good one.
But not only does it have those two in it, but it also has, I think what's his name? Michael Biehn from The Terminator?
Could be. Look it up.
Yes, it has from the first Terminator. And all the other actors in it, too, always usually play, side action characters. And I remember this movie so well because, A, it has Sean Connery.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
How can you not remember Sean Connery? But, it's one of those movies that has Nicolas Cage in it. It's in the 90s. It's around the time where he was kind of becoming a big name. What's his name?
I don't know. You have to.
No.
Go ahead, Harrison.
Anyways, so I chose this movie because of that. Because you have Navy SEALs, but you also have Marines, and then it has to do with Alcatraz, and then they bring in some SAS, Special Forces guy, and it just is extremely campy. It has explosions, it has firefights, it even has some really weird sex scenes in the beginning with Vanessa Marcel. who was in that what's that show? Was it Vegas? Las
Oh,
Vegas?
that's beautiful.
With James Caan, who we all know from The Godfather. But I just remember that film, just being a kid and watching it and thinking, like, this is so awesome.
I just want to chime in. I'm glad you mentioned that because I completely forgot about that film. I remember seeing that film in the theater when I was very young. I don't remember the year it came out. I can look it up. But I loved that film, and I remember thinking how incredibly awesome it was because, Brian, and you'll agree with this, we grew up watching the James Bond films. Our dad was a big Sean Connery fan. So to see Sean Connery kind of, in some weird ways, kind of in an underhanded way, reprising that sort of James Bond role, but in a completely reimagined way. I thought that was super cool, but more importantly, in a very, very strange way as well, one thing that always stuck out about that film was in the very opening scene, besides the sex scene with the weird sex scene with his wife, was if you remember, this is a weird detail, but he gets in the mail
Beatles, and it's in perfect shape,
the Beatles.
And he's like, the records sound better. Yeah.
Yes, and that I feel like in a weird way was influential to me because I'm a huge vinyl collector, and that kind of set a tone for me. I'm like, oh wow, that would be really cool to have music in its original format. And I remember thinking that even as a kid, and it to this day that's shaped me because I'm a massive vinyl collector, and I that's what I buy. I actually own that Meet the Beatles album, and I shout out to Nicolas Cage, a.k.a. Stanley Goodspeed of The Rock, for that scene. The film came out in 1996, so I was about 16.
That was like
then.
prime
that's
Nicolas
about,
Cage
right around that time I was
territory
getting
right then, for sure.
And right when I was getting into music myself. And
plus, our mom
Beatles,
had that
like
album
Oasis was
on
big.
record as a record album too, so that was kind of
cool.
You're
right.
We have that. I mean,
you're right.
But this is fun because both of y'all have mentioned two movies that I love, but I haven't watched in a while. Now I just want to watch both of those already because The Rock, that's a great movie. I haven't thought about that in forever. Yeah, for sure.
Good pick, Dan.
And just one more thing about that movie. Since you brought up the whole Beatles thing and how that, music and stuff, one thing that's always stuck out to me about that film, when I was younger, even to this day, I'm kind of a conspiracy theorist.
Okay.
And I loved at the end of the film when Sean Connery gives some directions to a church, and he gets the film from the church, and it ends with, "Hey, honey,
right.
You don't know who killed JFK?"
Oh yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, what?" And then it just ends, and I'm like, "Damn it!" But yeah, that's my number 5.
Great.
The Rock.
That's a great choice.
Huh.
All right. Well, my list is a little different. I sort of, like I mentioned, sort of categorized mine a little bit differently. So, because I couldn't really come up with 5 that are just like top 5, but my number 5 pick, I'm going to call my favorite Dolph Lundgren movie that you've never seen. Okay, because he's made a lot of like direct to video, sort of lower budget, sometimes foreign market movies, and sometimes those can be a little bit hard to dig through. Like maybe you're pulling something up on whatever your streaming platform of choice is, or Netflix. They rotate different things in through, and I don't know how readily available this might be for streaming. But I went through a phase where, I was watching sort of his back catalog of some of these other movies that I hadn't ever seen or heard of. So my pick for my favorite Dolph Lundgren movie that you've probably never seen, the original title was called The Mechanic, but I think it's more well known as, it's also known as The Russian Specialist. And
I've seen that. I've seen
so I don't really
remember
remember specifically what sticks with me about this movie or why I think it's the best, but I just remember going through a lot of these sort of direct-to-video movies. I felt like that was one of the stronger ones that he did. It's about, he's like this ex-Russian, again, he played Drago, so he's sort of got that, it's sort of maybe a little wink to that, but he's this Russian special forces retired guy, maybe a little bit like Commando, if you will. and he's asked to
Mhm.
rescue someone else's daughter. Not like, Commando Schwarzenegger's going after his own daughter. This one, he's trying to rescue someone else's daughter
Right.
because it's tied to, if I remember correctly, it's tied to the murder of his own wife and child, the people that are involved in the kidnapping. So it's sort of he's going out for to save the girl and get revenge at the same time. And it's low budget. You probably never heard of it, but I feel like it's a good one.
Yeah, and I'm just looking it up
Yeah.
now, and it's
not
actually
that
2005, which is really interesting because yeah, I mean that's obviously like almost 15 years ago now, but I mean that's late,
Mhm.
late in Dolph Lundgren's career. So I definitely now want to watch this. I've actually never seen this one, so
And there's a couple
I'm
other
really
ones kind of in
excited
that
you picked
same
because now I want to watch it.
vein that I probably could have chosen. I really liked Command Performance. That one came out a few years later. He did Direct Action, Detention. Those were a couple good ones too. But I like The Russian Specialist. Yeah.
I know you're a big Dolph Lundgren fan, so
Yeah.
it's interesting we both picked Dolph Lundgren for our number 5 spot. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, that's a great selection as well. Now I have something new to watch.
Yeah, me too.
And I want to go back and watch The Rock, for sure. All right, so number 4. My number 4 is a classic. It's an obvious pick, but I mean, I kind of did that. I kind of felt like I would do the ones that were the obvious picks. This is one we could totally do a podcast on. Maybe we will do it someday. I just love this film. It's one of those films where, like, my wife and I in the evenings will like, scroll through our stream channels, various stream channels, and decide what we're gonna watch. And every time it passes by, I'm like, let's watch this. She's like, really?
I have a guess what it is already,
I want to
but
watch
go
it
ahead.
every time. Well, I have basically
Okay.
4, 3, 2, and 1 are all that. They're the ones that every time I see them on stream, I'm like, let's watch that. And like, say, really? But this one also, going back, if you listen to our podcast a couple episodes ago about, I was talking about my collection of tank tops. This was the first tank top I ever bought, and it's still one of my favorites. And sidebar, if you don't follow us on social media, the BAMB the Pod tank top is up and live and available for purchase on Redbubble. So if you want to support us that way and buy a tank top, that'd be awesome. I ordered mine today, actually, so I'm really excited to get it. But it is...
Okay, that wasn't the one I was going to guess, but I bet it's still coming.
Yes, it is. I know what you're thinking. Obviously, Kurt Russell film, Snake Plissken, John Carpenter,
yeah,
Isaac Hayes as a villain. This movie is hilarious sometimes for the wrong reasons. It's awesome sometimes for all the right reasons. It's creative. It's innovative. I feel like it set a tone. I feel like it almost created a genre to itself. I feel like it's a film that's constantly being remade and reimagined, even to this day. But it's just the origin of all of that. The idea of the world being this evil, corrupt place that's constantly getting worse. Which, if we want to get intellectual here, Steven Pinkerton's books are actually out there, which very much say the opposite. The world's actually getting better. We're actually getting less violent, less crime-filled. But regardless of that, from a movie standpoint, that's not the case. It's always this gloom and doom, and this idea that you have to send a criminal in to a prison system, an area that's gotten so bad they've had to wall it off and turn it into a prison zone. And they send in Snake Plissken, who's a sort of notorious criminal, because the President of the United States his plane has crashed. He's landed in this prison zone, and they need to retrieve him. Isaac Hayes plays the ultimate villain who kind of runs the prison system. We talked about this movie before a little bit when we did our Death Race Beyond Anarchy episode, which is another film, a modern film that I love. But I think I love it so much because of the direct link to Escape from New York. It's just a great film. You got the patch, you got the really crappy tattoo of a snake coming up from his groin. I mean,
Yeah,
just
it's
things
iconic.
that you just see in this movie that you would never see in a modern day. Yeah, a modern day movie, and I just love Kurt Russell. I mean, I love Kurt Russell. That's all I can say. I just love the man.
Since you're so excited about that film, did you know that they're rebooting it?
Are they? I know that they're rebooting. Well, that makes sense. I know they did, of course, Escape from L.A., which was a later film, but I didn't know that they were rebooting it.
Yeah, it was always actually intended to be a trilogy, and the third one was supposed to take place in outer space.
What?
So, but now they're in talks now of rebooting Escape from New York.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it's good, and I hope Kurt Russell's in it. But that's one of those films where I feel like you can't really recreate it because it's such a timepiece of its time. And I love that, like, Ernest Borgnine's in there.
Yeah.
Just, like, driving around a taxi cab. Like, how weird is that? It's, like, so weird. It's like, this movie's weird. But, like, it's like, It's weird in all the right ways. So that's my number 4. All right, I'm passing it to Dan.
All right, so for my number 4, around the same time frame as The Rock, I went with a classic Stallone.
Oh boy,
very classic Stallone, and this movie resonated with me because I think it had to be the first comic book movie I had seen.
Wow!
And so I went
interesting
with Judge
choice,
Dredd.
bold choice.
And that. Bold choice. Yes, very bold choice. And I love Stallone. This is actually my second Stallone movie on this list. But I remember being a kid and I read the comics Judge Dredd growing up. And this was one of the first comic book films. I think I saw this even before Blade, to be honest with you. And I just remember the most iconic moment where he would just get off his bike and everybody shooting at him and the little light would come out of his helmet and he goes, I am Lola.
Yeah.
And that was just like his whole thing the whole time. Fun fact about that film, that actually in the comic books, Judge Dredd never shows his face. And that the producers of this film were not going to have a high budget actor who didn't show his face. Another thing about Stallone in this film, him and the director actually did not get along. That the director of the film said he would never work with Stallone. And that Stallone had wanted rewrites and wanted to be more of a comedy than an action comic book movie. But, I mean, you can't go wrong with this movie. It has Rob Schneider
It's
in
so weird.
which is so random.
I'm glad you mentioned Judge Dredd as well, because that's not one I would have guessed either. But for a couple things about that comic book, it was actually a British comic. I don't know if you were you aware of that initially? It was a British comic book.
It's also funny that you say that. Yes, I was aware of that. And actually, this film was actually shot in London.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that they actually kept the streets constantly wet just in case it rained, because it always rains in London.
Yeah, so I didn't know that either. And it is a British comic book, but then it actually got picked up, I think it was by Eagle Press. And they did release comics in America. The original comics were black and white. But they remade the movie not that long ago, and they actually released it as a 3D film. And it's actually the new release is pretty good as well. So if you've never seen that one as well, the new 3D film, it's worth checking out.
I have seen that one, and I enjoyed it a lot. Another fun fact about Judge Dredd is that it was actually intended also for Arnold Schwarzenegger to be the lead role. Which would have been an interesting rendition to hear Arnold Schwarzenegger take on the lawmaker, the man we know as I am the law.
Yeah, so for my number 4, I chose like what's the best worst movie I could think of. What's the best worst bad action movie? Mm-hmm. Which maybe you're thinking, is it Rollerball? I don't know. What could it be? Might be that, but no, I've got one even better. I love this movie for so many reasons. Brad, you've probably seen it before. I don't know, Dan, if you'll have even ever heard of it. Maybe you'll surprise me and you'll know about it. But I guess it's a guilty pleasure because I find it just hilarious and awesome at the same time. And that's Jim Cotta.
I told you about Jim Cotta, if I remember.
Did you?
Yeah, I think
it's possible.
Let me. Can I tell you a quick story?
Sure.
I discovered Jim Cotta through a friend. I was in Toronto working on my master's degree in philosophy, and another student there who was working on his PhD. We got in a conversation about how we loved these like bad action movies, and he's like, "Oh, Jim Cotta," and I'm like, "What?" He's like, he looked at me like dumbfounded, like, "Jim Cotta," and I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Oh my god!" He's like, "You gotta come to my house and watch Jim Cotta." So I went there and I watched it, and then I believe I contacted you about that. I'm like, "You gotta find this," and you found it, and I'm glad you've taken it in, and it's become a favorite because boy, that is a masterpiece of bad cinema.
It's amazing. And if you don't know what Jim Cotta is, it's literally like a gymnast doing martial arts. It's just so good.
Who's the
And
gymnast? Is it like Brian Boitano? I can't remember.
No, he was a figure skater.
Oh, you're right.
Who was the guy in it? Man, his name's on the tip of my tongue. I think that.
Here you go, Kurt Thomas.
Yes, thank you.
1985, Kurt Thomas.
But you gotta wonder, like, when they were making this, they had to know. I mean, it wasn't done in all seriousness. It couldn't have been. I mean, he's like pommel horse, like attacking people like ninjas and stuff.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes when he's like running through the woods, like fighting, and there's just like a pommel horse.
Yeah,
like it's not an actual pommel horse, but it's a pommel horse.
Yeah. No, Dan, like, have you seen this?
So I actually never seen the film, but I've actually seen the VHS, so I know it exists. See, I growing up, my father ran Blockbusters.
Oh,
and
wow!
Not only did he run Blockbusters, but I don't know if you guys had this, but he also ran Titan Videos, and which was like before Blockbuster was a big thing when everybody had their own private entities of rental movies. So I do remember visiting my father and going to the action movies, which I really gravitated towards at that age. And I remember Jim Cotta being there and reading about it and putting it back, thinking, nope, not for me.
Yeah,
it's a stinker.
I think that I originally had to. Now, this was well into like the time when DVD was a thing, and maybe even Blu-ray. I think I originally had to find it on a VHS because that's all they had for a while. But fortunately, it's around now. You can get it on DVD, probably Blu-ray, all of it. But yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it may be. I mean, it may be the best worst example of a bad action movie of all time.
Yeah. So
that was a good selection.
Well, thank you.
That was a good one. I had actually forgotten about that one as well. I got to go back and watch that now. I think we have it on one of our stream services. I think you bought it, didn't you?
I know if I see it, I usually buy it whatever whatever format it comes in. It's quite possible that I have it on Prime Video or Vudu or one of those. Yeah, for sure.
Good selection. Okay, so we're on to number 3. My number 3, again, and I said this before, mine are all kind of cliched selections. I kind of went with the safe bets, but that's good because I'm glad that you guys are mixing it up. I feel like it's good to have a variety of different opinions within the spectrum. This one actually is a good movie. It's a classic, and it's the first movie in what becomes a series. And I love every movie in the series, which a lot of people would firmly disagree with. But I firmly stand by my statement. I love every one of these movies. But that is the original Predator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Carl Weathers, and a whole slew of other great action stars. A masterfully done film. A film that really gets to the base of action in the sense that it's not an overly complicated plot, but it starts off as what you think is just going to be a simple storyline of big muscular dudes going into a jungle to like kill the bad dudes. and then this weird twist with like this sort of science fiction alien storyline. And I think it's Schwarzenegger at his best. I think it's just it is masterful storytelling. It's great action. I love it, and like I said, I've loved every iteration after that. I love Predator 2 with Danny Glover. I've loved the AVP movies. I love the Robert Rodriguez film. I love the new one that just came out that was done by
Shane Black, I believe.
Shane Black, thank you. Yes. And I thought that was a great movie too. I know a lot of people. There's mixed reviews. I love Predators. I don't know what it is. Not. I mean, I love the movie Predators, not the actual Predators in real life. But I think it's just it's good sci-fi. It's good action. And again, it's 80s, so it's still got the campiness. But I tell you what, every time I hear that Little Richard song, "Long Tall Sally." It just gets me revved up, even still to this day. Which is weird that they played that song of all the songs, but I love it. So,
yeah, and I think Predator has to be. If I think back right now, it has to be the first action movie I've ever seen.
Wow.
If there's a lot of action movies I've seen, but if there was one that I consistently watched all the time, it has to be Predator. And I also love Predator 2 with Danny Glover, especially being a Lethal Weapon fan and seeing Danny Glover take on the Predator itself. But going off what you said about even liking the new Predator movie, Shane Black was also in the first movie.
And he also wrote the Lethal Weapon movies.
He did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that until Dan told me that.
Mm-hmm.
That Shane Black was in the original Predator. Mm-hmm. So that's really cool. And I didn't know that he wrote the Lethal Weapon movie. So that's some great trivia. Mm-hmm. Fun stuff. I will say about Predator 2, my wife hates that movie. And the reason why is because the Jamaicans are the most not Jamaican people that have ever been Jamaican on screen. It's kind of like, when Brian, you and I grew up in the South, and when you watch people try to play Southerners and play like a Southern accent, it just comes off terrible. It's just like you can't get past it. So this like really fake like patois, like sort of like Jamaican accent is just god awful. But I still love the movie, and I love all the Predator movies. So, but that was my number 3 pick, and shout out to Shane Black as well. So I'm gonna pass over to Dan for his number 3.
My number 3 is actually a film I hope you guys do on this podcast. It is a Jean-Claude Van Damme film. It's actually, I would say, my favorite because I also watch this consistently, more than Kickboxer, more than Universal Soldier, is The Quest.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
With Jean-Claude Van Damme. But not only is Jean-Claude Van Damme in it, but Mr. Roger Moore.
Yeah.
James Bond himself is also in this film. This is another great film. I remember growing up watching. It starts off with Jean-Claude Van Damme and this really horrible makeup that makes him look like an old elderly man, where you could just really tell like he really had no budget anymore. But this is also Jean-Claude Van Damme's directorial debut.
Yeah.
And apparently, I was also reading about that he wrote this film with, I forget who it was.
Frank Dukes, I think.
Yeah, Frank Dukes, and he got sued over it because it was a similar story. But this has everything you would want in a Jean-Claude Van Damme film. It has, it starts off with the old man telling the story about how he went on this quest. It has the campiness. It has Roger Moore in it. I mean, who doesn't love James Bond when James Bond went really campy? And let's be honest. And Roger Moore was like the epitome of campy for James Bond. And and all the fight scenes, and I don't know. It's one of those films that I watch repeatedly, and I don't know why, but I loved it.
I love The Quest too. I'm glad you mentioned that. I recently rewatched that again because I think Brian, you had purchased it on stream. It was much better than I remembered it being. I kind of chalked this movie up to Jean-Claude had done a lot of the tournament type films early in his career, whether it be Kickboxer, Bloodsport, Lionheart, etc. We've talked about that before. But I felt like this was him really trying to hone in on that story arc, but by making it with a little bit more depth, a little bit more breadth, bringing in a little bit better acting, better directing, better higher end budget, and really trying to make a more polished Hollywood version of those kind of typical kind of tournament style films that had made him popular. And it's actually a much better movie than I remember it being. Yeah, it's still campy. It's still Jean-Claude Van Damme. But yeah, Dan's right. It was a movie that apparently he had written with Frank Dukes. Now, if you don't know who Frank Dukes is, he's the actual martial artist who won the Kumite. He was the first white Anglo martial artist to compete in the Kumite, and he won it, and that's actually what the film Bloodsport was based on. And Jean-Claude Van Damme and Frank Dukes became good friends in the filming of that movie Bloodsport, and Frank Dukes actually worked with Jean-Claude Van Damme to do a lot of the stunt work and choreographs, fight scenes with him in his other films, but I guess they had a falling out with the making of The Quest because Jean-Claude did not give him credit for the film, and apparently Frank Dukes claims that he helped write the script.
Here's my little story of it. This is more personal, Brad. I don't know if you remember this, but you and I went to see that movie in the theater, and we were the only people in the theater. And at the time, I think that was the first time that I had been into a movie, and, you know, it was like we had the whole thing to ourselves. It felt like our own, like, private screening.
I'm glad you mentioned that because we went there and we got there early because we thought, like, oh, it's a new Jean-Claude Van Damme film. It's going to be packed. And we got there. No one showed up. We were the only two people. And if you remember, we ended up sitting in seats on the opposite side.
That's right. We sat, like, completely apart from each other. Just because
you took one seat on the end of one aisle, and I took the other seat on the end of the other aisle. But it was a good movie. People made the wrong decision. They probably went to see something else that was stupid.
Yeah.
They should have gone to see
probably
The Quest.
Something with, like, Julia Roberts or something.
Yeah, or Brad Pitt. No offense to Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
But you probably want to see like Interview with the Vampire or something.
Well, I love that movie.
I kind of do too.
Just kidding.
It's a great movie, but still, The Quest was also great. That's all I'm saying. All right, Brian, what is your number 3?
All right, so my number 3 is best worst movie that was saved from obscurity. This is a movie that nobody really knew existed, or very few people knew. Now I think most people know about it because as soon as it was put out there, and I'm not talking about Manos, that's a whole nother thing, but another great one. But this is one where I think it sort of caught like a cultural zeitgeist for a moment because it was just like so horrible and so fantastic at the same time, and that's Miami Connection.
Okay.
You got the dragon sound. They're martial artists. They're also a rock band, right?
Right.
It's so amazing. If you have not seen Miami Connection, it was like an unreleased movie from the 80s that fell into obscurity, and then they brought it back and they started showing it in showings, and it sort of became like a more modern cult classic, if you will. Just because it's so horrible and so fantastic at the same time.
Kind of like a Samurai Cop.
Very much,
in some ways.
very much like Samurai Cop, yes.
And Samurai Cop was almost in my top 5, but I just had too many other ones.
I enjoy the Samurai Cop, but I have to go with Miami Connection.
Good. I got to go watch that one too. I think I put it on, and then one of those things where like I end up not really paying attention or kind of.
Yeah, you need to go back and pay attention, even just for the music. It's amazing.
Great selection. All right, we're on number 2. We made it to number 2. All right, this one is a movie that has become a tradition for me on my birthday. I watch this film. And I actually go to a certain
I didn't know you had such a tradition. So now I'm really curious.
Well, I started it recently.
It happened once, is what you're saying.
It's happened twice now. It's a recent tradition. Another movie I guess discovered somewhat later in life because we weren't allowed to watch this as kids because it was rated R and it was kind of, I don't know, bawdy and seedy and not appropriate. And that is the Patrick Swayze masterpiece, Roadhouse.
Ah.
Is there a better / worse film than Roadhouse?
That's a tough call.
I would like to do a whole entire podcast on Roadhouse. And someday maybe we will because it is fantastic. But I just want to mention 2 funny / humorous things about this film. Because this is a film that probably most people have seen. And that is one, obviously, the Parks and Recreation shout out. Where if you've watched that show, which everyone has, and that's when Chris Pratt, they're trying when what's her name, Leslie Knope is running for office, and Chris Pratt's character forgets to pay the cable bill, and he has all the constituents for her party there in the house who are supposed to be watching the debate. So they're trying to get the debate on the television. So instead of like watching TV, he just starts telling them the plots of movies. and the one that he selects is Roadhouse.
Yes. That's great.
And that was hilarious. But also, and this is kind of, I don't know, sort of a somber but interesting point. My wife is a big fan of Anthony Bourdain, who of course we lost last year, sadly, to suicide. But one day I was watching his show with her on, I don't remember which one of his shows it was, but one of them on Netflix. And he was actually, I think he was in South Carolina, but he was with Bill Murray, of all people. Because I guess Bill Murray owns a minor league baseball team.
Bill Murray, I think, lives in the
Carolinas.
Charleston area.
Okay, so they were meeting up, and they're having a meal somewhere in the South Carolina area, and they both started talking about Roadhouse, and it was hysterical. And Bill Murray's like, well, he's like, I'm like best friends with the female lead. I gotta look up her name. I can't remember her name off the top of my head here. I'm gonna look her up real quick. But he said, so he has this ongoing gag that he does, and he was telling Anthony Bourdain about this. Her name is Kelly Lynch. Okay, that's the actress's name. She's married now. I'm an older, and he says, whenever I see Roadhouse come on TV, he said, I call up her husband. And he says, I don't tell her who I am. He just answers his phone. He's like, I'm watching your wife have sex against a wall with Patrick Swayze. And then he just like hangs up the phone. And it was a hysterical story. And I just wanted to share that because I thought it was funny. It's a Bill Murray, story, anecdote, but also, of course, shout out to Anthony Bourdain, for all that he did in his life. It's sad that we lost him, but we can all reflect on that by saying we all love Roadhouse. Dan's got something to say.
I'm actually glad you brought this film up. I almost added it to the list, but I didn't. But not only is Roadhouse just the quintessential Patrick Swayze film, one of my favorites, but it also has the great Sam Elliott in it.
Yes.
Which does lead into my number 2, but I'm not going to go there. But it also has the Jeff Healey band in there.
Yes, a fantastic
which
blues
is
band.
Amazing. That Jeff Healey, one of my favorite bands of all time. It's blind guitarist. He's one of probably
Lap Steel.
I was about to say the first time I ever found out that was a thing.
Yeah,
playing guitar on your lap and stuff like that, and I had no idea that was possible. And I love that they integrated that into this film, and that he was actually a huge part in the Roadhouse film. So I'm very glad you brought this film because it's one of my favorites.
Sweet. All right, so I guess we're gonna go to you, Dan. We're gonna go right back to you for your number 2.
So my number 2, I'm going off Sam Elliott, and a film that I'm sure everybody has seen. And I know you guys have said, when you say bad, doesn't mean necessarily like campy, but also like Michael Jackson kind of bad, like awesome. Would be Tombstone.
Yeah.
Oh man, I love Tombstone.
Love Tombstone. I grew up watching westerns. My father made sure that it was John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, but we always had westerns going on in our house. And I remember watching Tombstone, and I've always loved the story of Doc Holliday. Wyatt Earp, and I love that Val Kilmer. I think has to be the best role that Val Kilmer has ever done, aside from Iceman from Top Gun. I think he played Doc Holliday to a T, and also again, what's his face from the Terminator is in that film.
And Kurt Russell.
Yeah, and Kurt Russell's in that film, and I love the whole scenes with Doc Holliday. Honestly, my favorite scene probably from any film is when it has to be like pretty early on into the film, where they go outside and they're about to do a brawl or a fight, and the one cowboy, and I also love about this movie that cowboys were considered the bad guys.
Yeah.
Which we, as in Americana history, we're all taught that no, cowboys is the cool thing.
Yeah.
And they're the heroes of the story. The cowboy is the hero of the story, but in this film, the cowboys were the bad guys of the film. But I love the fact that they're outside, they're about to fight. Doc Holliday walks out, and one of the cowboys says, "He's so drunk, I'm sure he's singing too." And Doc Holliday, with Val Kilmer like fashion, just says, "Well, I have two guns for the both of you." A line that to this day I will never forget, and probably just like I like to reference it when I get drunk sometimes. And unfortunately, nobody ever gets it.
That's a great movie. I haven't seen in forever. And let's not forget Val Kilmer was also Mad Morgan.
And let's also not forget that he was Jim Morrison in The Doors. Here's the thing about Val Kilmer. To me, he's one of the he is either Val Kilmer is in somewhat ways like Nicolas Cage, although I feel like Nicolas Cage
I was just thinking the same thing.
Maybe more egregious in this, but he's either like incredible or just terrible. Like there's like not
or sometimes both in the same movie.
Maybe. But like you watch Nicolas Cage in like Adaptation, and that is like brilliant. And then you watch some other stuff like what was that one where he's like hunting for like the Declaration of Independence or something? You're just like, what the hell?
National Treasure.
But that's how Val Kilmer is. Like you watch him as like Mad Morgan, or you watch him as like Doc Holliday, and you're just like, man, this is fantastic. And you watch him in some other stuff, and you're like, what in the world? Sidebar, the reason that the director for Batman Forever chose Val Kilmer to be the Batman in that film was because of his performance as Doc Holliday in Tombstone. He saw that film and was like, this guy's phenomenal. I want him. He's the Batman. And then, of course, his Batman performance was, I think, kind of lackluster. But I love that film. That and Pale Rider are probably my two favorite mainstream westerns.
Let's not forget Unforgiven.
Unforgiven's fantastic. I like some of the spaghetti westerns. Keoma, which I recently watched, is fantastic. Of course, the original Django with Franco Nero. Franco Nero could have been in Franco Nero, Kurt Russell, and Patrick Swayze. Their movies all could have occupied my entire top 5. But I didn't put any Franco Nero films in my top 5, but they would have been, Enter the Ninja, Keoma, those ones. Django would have been if we did a top 10 list, they would have shown up for sure. But great selection, Dan.
And he's got some great crime movies too that I bet you've never seen. Franco Nero, like The Fifth Chord. I want to say he's in that one.
And just going off what you guys were just saying, about Val Kilmer is either on point or not on point. Another film that I'm surprised you guys didn't say is The Saint, where he plays several characters throughout that film and takes on these different personas with accents or even body language in that film, which I think I like Val Kilmer enough to say that it's actually another one of my favorite Val Kilmer films.
I haven't seen The Saint in a long time. I should revisit that.
Probably the best film I've seen him in more recently is Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah,
he was great in that one
movie.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Brian, what is your number 2?
Well, I'm a video game guy.
Yeah.
I've got a PlayStation t-shirt on even right now in Japanese. So I'm going with the best, worst, or maybe worst, best video game bad action movie.
Okay.
Now, you might be thinking to yourself, it has to be Street Fighter was Jean-Claude, because it's pretty bad, right?
No, it is. Yeah.
But I went with I went with the best instead of the worst, and I'm going with Mortal Kombat.
Nice.
It's total cheese,
Yes.
but at the time that it came out, it really was like, okay, somebody did make a pretty cool action-packed movie based on a video game.
Yeah, that was kind of a novelty.
Doesn't have a lot of depth or anything like that. Is it a great movie? No. It does have a great soundtrack. It's very much of its time. It's very dated. But I still think, like, as a video game adaptation movie, and certainly there's probably been a lot better ones that have come out since then. Maybe not. But I don't know. Something about it. I love the Mortal Kombat movie.
Yeah, and a strange, weird appearance of Christopher Lambert, right?
Yes, the Highlander is in it as Raiden.
Very strange.
Yeah.
We actually had talked about, and I still think we probably will do this, is doing a Mortal Kombat versus Street Fighter 2 podcast, but not on the video games, on the movies.
Yeah, on the movies. Yeah, I think that's something we'll revisit. But I wanted to put it. We're making a list, and it's one that came to me that. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it's one that's just kind of sticks with me. It's fun to just kind of turn on once in a while.
Yeah. And what's his name? Pete Sampras's wife is in there. From the girl from
Billy Madison.
Yeah.
And I'm a big Mortal Kombat fan. We've talked about that some before. Yeah. So, yeah.
Great. Did you have anything more to say about Mortal Kombat?
You said it.
Oh, I said it with the Christmas. All right, so we're to our number ones. And we're coming right at an hour, so that worked out nicely.
No, I already know what you're going to pick.
Yeah, everyone does.
Should I just say it?
Just say it.
Because I could have easily put it as my number one, but I didn't because I wanted to have another one to add. Yeah. But I know it's Big Trouble in Little China.
That is maybe my favorite movie of all time. And this movie is just so much fun. It's got action. It's got campy special effects. It's got Kurt Russell, who I love. But what I think is so genius about this film, especially going back on this, is the fact that it's kind of, if you really think about it, it's a counter-narrative to sort of the American mythos. And what I mean by that is, and like the whole film genre of this era, and we talked about this in the last podcast, is there is inevitably, it seems like, especially in the 80s, this sort of underlying racial tone that's often racist. And you see that in Big Trouble in Little China in a lot of ways, in the sense that there's this weird sort of mystical, sort of magical suspicion of people of Asian ancestry. And that was a very big theme in the 80s, not only with this film, but like, what was the Golden Child, the Eddie Murphy film. And sort of like Asians had magic. That was sort of the idea.
Right.
But what I like about this film is the fact that Kurt Russell is seen as the head sort of lead role as Jack Burton. He's the star, but he's really not. He's really the dope. And actually, it's Eddie, the Asian martial arts expert, who really is the one who saves the day. And John Carpenter captures that. And I felt like, in some way, it was kind of deconstructing the action hero as the atypical sort of white alpha male, but in a sort of subtle comedic way. It was taking that concept of what we think of as being, like the Schwarzenegger or the Stallone or the Bruce Willis or the Jean-Claude Van Damme, as sort of the alpha white male being the action star, and putting that character in that role. But then, like I said, sort of deconstructing it and really kind of exposing that he's sort of useless. He kind of doesn't really, he's always kind of like fumbling and not really getting things done. And it's actually, this other character who's really, really moving the plot forward and really actually accomplishing the tasks. And it's kind of a counter-American narrative. So even though I do find that there is certainly a sort of racial undertone there that maybe is not a sort of stereotypical a look at Asian people of Asian ancestry, particularly Chinese ancestry in San Francisco area in Little China, there still is a counter narrative there showing that sort of the white big buff action hero is maybe not maybe at all is not as it seems, if that makes sense. But just a masterfully done film.
After saying Mortal Kombat, now bringing up Big Trouble in Little China, I always felt there was a weird connection between Raiden and one of the three ninjas that they fight in Big Trouble in Little China, and he's wearing the same hat. And he's expelling lightning from his fingertips. So I saw that really interesting. I've always wondered if they actually got influence for that character from this film.
Yeah, there's definitely some similarities. I agree.
Yeah, that's a great movie. I knew you were going to pick that one.
Yeah. All right, Dan, I'm excited to hear your number one.
Yeah, me too.
So my number one, we're going back to Stallone again.
Okay.
And again, another film I watched repeatedly. Actually, honestly, these 5 films I have come up with I have actually watched repeatedly as a kid. But number one for me would be Cobra.
Oh, man.
Ooh, wow.
Oh, man. This film has everything and nothing at the same time.
That's a great way of putting it.
First off, this film was actually, it started off actually from Sylvester Stallone working on Beverly Hills Cop. And he was actually supposed to be the lead character for Beverly Hills Cop. And the budget became too big, so he no longer became the lead for that film and took the ideas that he had for Beverly Hills Cop for Cobra. But I mean, great film, action-wise. It also has, what's her name from Rocky IV?
I can't remember her name.
Which ended up becoming his wife, right?
Right, yes. Or they dated.
They dated or somewhat. But, this is, classic Stallone. He plays this cop. I also love the fact that he always had like a match in his mouth. The whole entire time. Some sort of weird oral fixation that we won't go into, but I always found it quite interesting. But yes, Cobra, I mean, what a great film. I mean, even down to his handgun that had Cobra on it, just to, emphasize like who he was. Another interesting fact, I actually just found this out, was that the character Cobra is named Marion, after John Wayne.
Yeah.
Who is the quintessential man of man.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cobra, another great film. I had to go with it. It's something I rewatched over and over again. It's actually my father's favorite film, out of all things.
Nice.
But yeah, this is my number one, Cobra.
That's a great choice. I actually thought about putting that one on my list if I was going to pick a Stallone one. The actress you're mentioning was Bridget Nielsen.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I do believe they were married for a while, and I think didn't she end up like dating Flava Flav or something like in the early 2000s or something?
Yeah, and she
couple.
actually plays a pivotal role in the Creed 2 film. That recently,
interesting.
If you've not seen Creed
Spoilers.
2, spoiler alert. Bridget Nielsen plays she's not in the film a lot, but she plays a very important role in that film.
She was also Red Sonja.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. With Schwarzenegger. I think that may have been one of her first films.
Probably was, yeah.
I love Cobra as well. It's terrible yet wonderful at the same time. I believe it was a Cannon film.
It was actually, unless I'm misremembering, I feel like it was the first rated R movie I ever watched.
Nice.
I was at a friend's house and we rented it, and I felt like I was probably not supposed to be watching it. But then I remember going home and telling our parents because I probably felt a little guilty, and our dad being like, I've seen it. It's okay. You can handle that one. So.
It was based off a novel, but I think it took wide liberties. And just going back to your selection of the other Stallone film, Judge Dredd. Thank you. Apparently, that story was very true of Stallone in general in terms of taking over the set. Because of his background doing the Rocky movies, which not only he starred in, but of course wrote and directed as well, a lot of people had problems with him on set because he would kind of try to hoodwink and sort of take over the set. And my understanding is it sounds like he ran into trouble with the director of Judge Dredd, but my understanding is with Cobra, he basically ended up doing that. He took over the film and ended up basically kind of muscling literally and metaphorically, the director out of the director's chair and kind of taking it over and recutting the whole film. So that's a little interesting sidebar about Cobra.
Yeah, cool. So, any guesses as to what mine is? Mine have sort of been like wild card choices.
Yeah, yours have been wild card choices. I'm trying to think of what.
I didn't go for the straight, easy top 5 list. I went a little wild with it, but
I honestly have no idea what you're gonna pick.
Okay, so I had a couple things rattling around in my head. I thought, I love Commando.
Yeah.
It's probably my favorite Schwarzenegger movie. I love Enter the Dragon, the Bruce Lee movie. It's probably, my favorite sort of fighting tournament movie.
Mm-hmm.
But now this is one we've already done a whole podcast about, so we don't probably need to say much more about it. But if I had to pick one just bad action movie, however you want to call it, the one that just comes to mind for me as my number one and just my gut reaction would have to be The Last Dragon.
Nice. I thought of The Last Dragon too, and I wondered if you would have that on your list. It certainly would be in my top 10. We grew up on that one, and like you said, we've had an entire podcast on that one. I think that was the first podcast where we started drinking too.
I think it probably was. Yeah.
So that is of course a masterpiece. I'm a huge Vanity fan, but those, and of course, and I love Motown. So that's a great film.
Yeah, so not much more I need to say about that one. If you haven't listened to that episode, we go into a lot of detail, and it was a pretty fun one. So, but if you haven't seen it, Last Dragon, it's great. It's kind of a guilty pleasure movie, but has some cool action and kung fu and stuff like that, and music, and I don't know. It's like a big kung fu music video from the 80s.
Yes, well stated. Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. And I think some of those films we'll probably do maybe entire episodes on at some point. But it was fun to just kind of lie them out. And I have several films now I want to sit down and
revisit.
watch
Yeah. And I think if other people who are listening to this, maybe they have comments about maybe these are movies they love for different reasons or hate for different reasons, feel free to talk about it. Or if you've got other ones that you prefer or things that maybe you think should have made our list, feel free to share them with us, and that might give us more ideas or things we want to revisit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say this, just to close this out, that Devil's Cut whiskey, I did end up drinking it all. That was a lot. All that I had in my glass. I feel like it gets better on ice. I feel like that's the kind of, every kind of whiskey is different. And I feel like that, it is very bold, like Dan said. I feel like if you put it on a good bit of ice and let it settle, it does even it out. Maybe that's just because it's bad whiskey.
I mean, ice can do that sometimes, right?
It opened it up. No, but in all seriousness, I did feel like it was a little bit better once it kind of set on ice and melded a little bit. Well,
there you go.
I have a nice, warm, cozy feeling.
I'm happy for you.
Well, that was another exciting episode of BAM the Pod. Thank you for listening. Like Brian said, let us know if you have suggestions. Hop on our Facebook page, or find us on one of those other social media pages. Dan, you can look him up too. He's on Instagram. His name is Dan Venture, right? Is that correct on Instagram?
Nice.
So you can find him there. Follow him in his life journeys, and we thank you for being here again and for offering some great movies.
Definitely,
suggestions.
Yeah, we grew up watching a lot of the same ones, so it's definitely nice to get a different perspective in there.
And hopefully, moving forward, we'll bring some other maybe some other guests on, some other BAM the Pod and friends.
Yeah,
because it's nice to bring in another voice.
Definitely.
So. Alrighty, well, we're going to sign out. Thank you for listening, and keep watching those action movies. and we'll be back.
Yeah.
Probably
With
again
something.
before too long.
Okay, bye.
All right. Bye.
If you like this episode, be sure to check out some of our previous episodes. They're available wherever podcasts are streamable. You can find us at facebook.com/group/BAMThePod. Or if you prefer Twitter, you can find us at @BAMThePod. And of course, our webpage is still available, which is bam.buzzsprout.com. My Instagram page is lowgray_the medicine man. Again, thanks for listening. Give us a follow on social media and let us know what you think.